This real-side experience would overall, as its general theme, be one representing the facing of the personal self and all of creation, as this is a major part of our process of becoming more aware, a process that culminates in eventually standing real with the ears, as the beings of light that we are, once we have recognized that position through the comparisons that all experience in all its multitudes of endless form and expression in the simulated creations provide. For as we become more aware, as we earn our awareness through the focus, the standing ever more so consistently in the new nowness of our real awareness, and the constant promoting of the true reality, the all is, with everything equaling itself, with life and the real guides sharing with us as we share the ears, as we all support each other, we recognize more of the real awareness that we are. For standing in the nowness of the real awareness is supporting of the all is, as the real awareness is the isness life is, and we very much support the is by deciding to stand in the reality of it, and we no longer are then standing in the personal consciousness that will be contributing to the degradation of the simulator through its restricted created consciousness cause to effect design. By standing in the nowness of the real awareness, we no longer are adding to the degradation of the all-natural environment through the created consciousness programming of lifetimes, mostly subconscious, with the agreed to reptilian systems of all-natural environment destruction, an all-natural environment that is this isness expressed throughout the creational life levels, and as the process continues, as we recognize the real intent, which is the real awareness, the real intent, which is to recognize and stand real with the ears, we eventually will learn to see this true reality, a reality that is invisible to the personal self, but one that the real awareness can see, once recognition is established. But we must also extricate ourselves from the tapline bindings of creation, of our decided and agreed upon emotional attachments and agreements, as most of this will be subconscious, as each lifetime around we tend only be aware of that which we are consciously and currently deciding on. But the process involves unveiling all these agreements and attachments, laying them bare, then letting them go. For to stand in the true reality of the is, we must decide to not cling on to any creationally based idea, for every created idea comes with a cause and effect experience, as is the design of the simulators. And any idea we hold to is a decision to experience the effects of, which can only be done in creation, but at least we can reach a stage where we are the conscious effects. For it is that which we are unconscious of, the vast bulk of subconscious agreement and attachment tap lines, that mire us in cause and effect creation, and keep us recycling in the restricting simulators. We must reach the point where we can see the entirety of our created consciousness and every idea that makes up its construction. Then we consciously decide what we will activate or not through the ideas that effect experience in creation. It's rather as though we carry all these ideas, or the vast majority of them, with us, but we are unaware we are doing so. We are unconscious to them, and so they are constantly producing the effect experiences, even though we are unconscious of the nature of these ideas. And then the idea would be to ultimately leave all the ideas of the created consciousness alone, decide to stand real with the ears, and let the personal self and the created simulator it manifests fade away, and it no longer be our reality. A long journey indeed, and expressed as a process in our real side experiences in all the ways that it is. We must rather learn to see and read the meaning of what we are shown, rather than literally determine the representation with our minds. A seeing that is the same as is required to recognize the ears, and so a good recognitional practice for us as we continue to have real side experiences that can be seen in the literal visual sense for the personal self, but also provide the opportunity to flex our recognition to see and recognize their meaning more so. And with the ears, the seeing is endless, and we see as much as our recognitional ability allows. In this real side experience, I began in the company of a group. What we were doing wasn't especially significant. We were simply walking the streets. The feature of the experience that impressed upon me the most was how this group and I were almost identical in our appearances, like Kevin clones. We also were all wearing masks, because the only way we could differentiate between each other, that which made it so that we were not entirely identical, was a slight difference in our facial features, and it was as though we wished to not be able to identify each other through the wearing of these masks. This could be construed as a reluctance to face the self, or certain parts of it, as all these identical Kevin clones were quite clearly aspects of my personal self that perhaps I didn't want to, or was not quite ready to face or deal with. But as we proceeded, some of these personal self aspects, and they could be representing emotional attachments, agreements, subconscious ideas, etc., removed their masks and started attacking some of the other aspects and myself. Dwayne had shared an experience where he found himself wrestling with the personal self, and this situation here was along similar lines, in that as long as we have a personal self, for we need it until we recognize the ease through the experiences it creates as comparisons, we have to rather deal with it. The personal self is constructed, as we have decided, over the multitudes of lifetimes with its consciousness, and has its likes, dislikes, routines, and a reluctance to move beyond the comfort zones of them. As such, it is always rather a chore of dragging the personal self along, as the real awareness decides to recognize the ease. We do rather have to have the personal self aligned with the real intent. We have to figure out how to adjust it so that it is complementing the real intent of the real awareness and not in opposition of it, despite its fear and reluctance as we continue to step into the endless unknown of life. One thing that can never work is fighting the personal self, struggling with it, and trying to dispel however its consciousness has been constructed. For it is a programmed construct that can't be undone, and to fight with the design of it, that was after all by our choices and decisions, is nonsensical and goes nowhere. All we can do is stand aside from the personal self and its created consciousness construction in the new nowness of our real awareness, to be detached and indifferent to it, and not cater to the routines it has locked into its design, for fighting it is a battle that will never end, but letting go and being indifferent to it, and the fight with the personal self is over at least, and focus placed with the ears instead, and in the nowness of this true reality. And it is so that when we encounter an adversary on the real side that can't be bested, we generally are engaging the personal self and fighting with it, as this would be a battle we can't win. And so, in this real side experience, it wasn't just that I was fighting myself, but as though a selection of specific aspects of my personal self that perhaps I didn't care for were made manifest and all fighting each other. They would remove their masks, however, indicating that they were at least identified specifically as to what they were, or they would have been effectively faceless, all bundled into the personal self, and more difficult to determine as to what attitudes or ideas they represented, the ideas that needed addressing. But evidently, fighting with these identified personal self aspects was not the answer, as again, fighting the personal self is an exercise in futility. Identifying what they represented of the personal self was enough, as up until now they would have been perhaps taplines I was unconscious of, and the idea would be now to let them go. For engaging with any idea in creation would be agreement and decision for its perpetuation, and for us to be the effects of, as we give it focus and attention, and this would extend to the ideas that make up the construction of the created consciousness. Being aware and conscious of them is enough, and then to let them be, not to keep attention and focus placed upon them, for if we were to do so, we would be then the effects. Perhaps this realization was determined, as the fighting between the Kevin duplicates and myself ceased, and the scene switched. Now I would find myself in a colossal building, very much like a mansion in its design and grandeur, and within were multitudes of individuals, all lavishly dressed. Everything would start off fine. Everybody seemed at ease in everyone's company, but as the moments passed, everything would gradually worsen. It's as though all the individuals would become embittered with each other and mistrustful, and then the situation would descend into them fighting each other, then with the individuals securing an assortment of weapons and killing each other with them. I was among this mayhem also, and battling with these individuals, but more so that I was defending myself, as opposed to initiating the conflict, as I fended off sword-wielding and axe-toting people, as everything transitioned from peaceful coexistence to mayhem, then slaughter, so would the mansion change. It would transition from a lavish, expensive-looking mansion, decline, deteriorate, and eventually, as the last few mansion dwellers were killing each other, it would be a mansion devoid of furniture, in a state of decay and disrepair. Usually at the end, when everything was at its very worst, would be a reset. Everything would be returned to the grandeur and calm it had been at the start, but then go through this transition again, as though on an endless, repetitive loop. Throughout this sequence of mansion deterioration and resets was one constant, that being a woman who always would be accompanying me, as I fought and defended myself from the crazed mansion dwellers, as they descended into bloodthirsty madness. She was the only individual unafflicted, and indeed left alone, and maybe not even noticed by the mansion dwellers, and I would suggest she was a real guide. At one point I asked her for a gun to better defend myself with, but she suggested this was not in my best interests. What we have here then would be a large building, a mansion, representing a creation overall, representing the collective created consciousness of all in this creation, that through the overall design of the consciousness makes the simulator what it is. A simulator then, going through its phases, as everything would begin as pristine as is possible in what we would call the golden epoch. Then as the created consciousness is established, as attitudes begin to be embraced and decided upon, as ideas, agreements, and attachments compound, as controlling individuals establish themselves and garner agreement to their control mechanisms that further constricts the overall consciousness, so does the simulator reflect this compacting, compounding overall consciousness, and goes through its phases of degradation. The mansion becomes then tired, dilapidated, the attitudes becoming more abrasive and distorted, until the inevitable simulator collapse and a reset, and back all the individuals are again, in a reconstructed simulator, and the cycle repeats. I am caught up in these simulators also, as was represented here, and who knows how many simulations I or anyone has been through, how many times we have experienced their implosion and been returned again in a new golden age, in a new simulator. That always I am embroiled in the mayhem does indicate how agreement to the ideas that the overall mayhem represents must have been so, for just like the personal self, we very much must endeavour to stand indifferent to a creation, to stand in the nowness of our real awareness. For if we stand in the personal self, we are the effects of its construction, and if we place our focus, our attention, if we agree to any of the ideas that creation comprises of, we also are the effects of these ideas, which is a part of the controller's game, to seize your attention, to have you engaged mentally and emotionally with that which they are creating. Then you are rather caught up in the effects of it, regardless of what stance you take, even if you are in opposition of what the controllers are doing. For taking a literal idea position in response to a created idea has you agreeing with the initial idea that you have applied your own created idea to, and you will have to deal with the effects. And so, to agree with what was occurring in this mansion, representing the simulator, that the mayhem and drama had claimed my attention and focus, did represent how this would indeed have me doomed to recycle endlessly through who knows how many simulators, until we wake up and learn to stand in the objective indifference and aside from cause and effect of the real awareness. We do have to face creation, however, as creation is the effect of the created consciousness, and how creation is currently is due to how we all have contributed through the choices, decisions, agreements we have made through the cause to effect experience generator that is the personal self. So we rather have to deal with and face all that we have had a hand in constructing. And as we lay bare the aspects of the personal self and its consciousness, it follows that we must be confronted with and go through situations that are manifest from a created consciousness we have been unconscious of up until now. As we do so, we will be bombarded with situations and confrontation, and we learn better to deal with and handle everything without agreeing to anything that manifests in our experience that is of a creationally based idea nature. If we handle these experiences poorly, we rather get embroiled in them, incorporate them, and sit then in their effects. So this mansion simulator is a macrocosm of the personal self, in that we would endeavour to not fight and struggle with its construction, as in this experience, to stop battling the aspects of my masked duplicates, or battling with the ideas of a simulator that these individuals in the mansion represented, to yes, identify and become aware of the construction of the personal self and the creation it is in, deal with it, face it, but from the new nowness of the real awareness, and not from the personal self, which would only mire us in deeper. For each of the mansion cycles had me performing a little better, as though the guides had constructed this as a training for me to better my ability to stand in the indifference of my real awareness. And no wonder the guide suggested my acquiring of a gun unwise, for the gun would represent my responding to the ideas that the battle represented with ideas of my own through the firing of my gun. And so this would represent an engaging with creation, but through the idea creations of the personal self. And perhaps a better weapon would afford victory, a better idea in creation trumping a weaker one, with the subsequent agreement securing a better creational position. But creational ideas they all would be, and in creation we would remain. And indeed, on the final rerun of the mansion sequence of deterioration, I would actually exit the building and onto the grounds beyond, indicating the becoming aware and facing of far more than just the physical, one-dimensional level of creation, facing all of multi-dimensional creation and everything that makes up its construction, just as we must face the personal self and its entire created consciousness. A few of the mansion dwellers had also spilled out onto the mansion grounds, and I would attempt to escape from their murderous inclinations. But we surely do have to face all of creation, or we can't establish ourselves in the real universes of the ears. We can't run away from this process of facing creation and the personal self. And indeed, the mansion grounds representing the other levels of creation beyond the collective created consciousness of the mansion were surrounded by an impassable wire fence, made impregnable by its sheer size, and that it was electrified, representing the creational simulator's boundary that one cannot breach unless they have the recognition to do so and have earned their way into the real universes beyond it, and have faced all of creation. And so I was assailed by these mansion dwellers. Interestingly, the weapons of choice inside the mansion had been rather rudimentary, swords and axes and such. This was suggesting that I had successfully faced creation up to a point, indicated by the weapons utilized that were of a less sophisticated nature, as though the ideas they thrust at me, the ideas I had to face, represented by the weapons, were in the past now, realized, dealt with, and rather old hat. But out here on the mansion grounds, these individuals had very high-tech weaponry, rather bizarre in appearance, as they consisted of curious spinning discs and orbs. They would hurl these oddities of weapons at each other, and it would slice and dice the target down to their very atoms, killing them just as readily as the more basic weapons utilized inside the mansion. I would suggest that these weapons were very high-tech and futuristic looking, indicating these were creational ideas that were to be faced, but that I would not be doing so at this time, but at some time in the future, if I so decided, and naturally I would wish to do so, if I did indeed intend to face all of creation and be in a position to supersede it. But at this time, I either was not quite ready for the ideas these high-tech weapons represented, or lacked the capability to handle them. For unlike in the mansion, where I was able to deal with and defend myself from the relentless assaults there, here I would be defeated. One of the mansion dwellers hurled his weapon at me, and I was engulfed in all the discs and spheres which reduced me to atoms. It was actually rather painful too, and I was somewhat relieved when I was finally dispatched. And now the scene switched one last time, and I was receiving what I would construe as an assessment of my overall performance. There I was, sat in a chair, with Dwayne sat in a chair behind a desk opposite to me. In his hands was a large folder that would contain a picture and image representation of all the ideas of creation and my personal self that required facing, and those ideas which I had successfully faced, identified, released, and resolved, and no longer tap-lined by, were indicated as a page of the folder absent of the picture that represented the specific idea. Rather pleasingly, it seemed, there were a lot of absent images, but certainly plenty remained and needed to be worked through. Dwayne would show me various pages of the folder and discuss with me what the images that remained represented. I noticed that some of the images, though present, were becoming detached from the pages, though not quite ready to be released, almost as though I could easily peel them from the page if I wanted to. Dwayne would speak predominantly in a way and with a language that my real awareness could understand to an extent, but that was bewildering and completely lost to my personal self, other than the overall impression from the real awareness of what this scene represented, that being an assessment of my process in regards to the tap-lining ideas still binding me to creation. For Dwayne was using a kind of language of the ears, communicating in such a way with the words he used that was a direct expression of the essence of the ears, and as such, the same recognition required to see the ears was equally as required to see what he was expressing with this language he was utilizing. I could recognize only a little of it through my real awareness, for as far as my recognition of the ears went, a recognition also required to decipher Dwayne's words. My real awareness had a long way to go. The experience would end here, and despite still having a long way for me to go in regards to my recognition of the ears, as it is an endless journey, the process rolls on, and will continue on as I continually decide it, to decide to become ever more aware, and eventually to start to see and recognize the true reality life is, the all is.
That's terrific, Kevin. How it ended up there. And yes, yes, this is where the new language comes in. That's very important because people are so set in the old ways of, considering things with their personal self. And so they're just really stuck with all of it, and really all of it, all these definitions and these expert fact checkers and all this stuff and these agencies that we have here that we're so used to. It's just turned into a lot of nonsense, and it's purposely done so at this point here. And what's really important is that, yes, each person that decides, keep going. And when the real intent is there, very, very important to just figure this out. Just give yourself time. Just it's like a child learning. I've I feel like a child myself. I'm in no rush because it's an illusion, it's an isness, and it's available. And the adventure is that as you really decide more so and more so to recognize it and to share this and support others that recognize it also, this is very, very important. And this is how the reality of this all awareness that life is becomes exposed for all of us. Very, very important. So those that just sit on the sidelines and listen and dilly-dally, no, that's not it. You have to do something you've never done before, step up. And just like Kevin here, he's stepped up, he's has these experiences, he takes the time to share them. We do the great witness, etc. So I see these things, I bring these things along so people have the opportunity to take part, but not everybody wants to do it. They've got all kinds of excuses and attitudes, and usually their personal side is there. So again, each person decides what is first and what is most important. And I've been through a lot this lifetime, had the family and all that, and everything was really fine, but I left because they weren't interested in going any further. They just wanted to stay stuck, and that's their choice. So I wanted to go on the adventure of meeting others and doing other things, and I had to leave, had to get out of there, out of the old hen house, etc. Sometimes you just have to leave. Sometimes you have to physically move yourself around, and Paul did this a lot too. It breaks up the old patterns, etc. So the adventure continues, and that support is very, very important for people to earn their way. And it's a matter of, again, we're the deciders now. When we were with the masters and gurus and in religions and all this funny stuff, we looked to the authority for something. So now we're past that now. This is the new nowness. We decide what it is that we're going to recognize and utilize that makes sense for all life and with all life. This is the bigger picture, to where, yes, it becomes scary for the personal self because it keeps thinking it'll be left behind. Well, it won't be. Just like your car out there outside parked somewhere. The car can consider whatever it wants, but it's fine. It's there. If you need the car, it's there. But eventually you don't. And the ideas of the personal self are just that. They're just ideas. They're all made up. So we play with these things for as long as we need them. But that all awareness that we have is so real and so genuine that this personal self, again, doesn't even need to be considered at a certain point. But that's a big journey. But in the meantime, yes, enjoy the ride. And as long as you have the intent sincerely to continue, succeed, and support all these things, it's all very important. Well, then you're welcome by the real guides, and they will show you things that others will not see. It's always your choice. Yes, thank you, Kevin. That was so cool. Thank you so much.